My name is Leonardo Peñaloza-Pacheco. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in econ in Cornell University. I'm currently I'm gonna be in the job market this year. So what I'm going to present is like mostly work in progress of my job market paper. So any feedback and any comment is more than welcome. So the paper is Migration, Market Power, and Firms. And basically, as motivation, this is not probably like something that is necessary for the audience here, but as many of us know, we know that in the last 20 years, the number of migrants increased by 56%, which represented like a significant increase in the number of people moving across countries in the world. And something very particular about it is that a lot of these migration episodes were driven by forced migration, particularly refugees, like the ones from Syria into Turkey, for instance, or the ones from Venezuela and Colombia, which is going to be like the focus of my analysis in this paper. And also something particular is that 70% of forced migrants in the world are in developing countries. And this is going to be important for my analysis and important for the research question that I'm going to try to answer in this paper, because developing countries, they have institutions and they have labor markets that have particular features compared to developed countries. And these features have been like relatively not very well analyzed in many settings, particularly of migration. And I'm going to try to convince you that these features are going to be crucial in order to understand the effects of migration on the labor market. And something that we know from the literature so far, like this increasing literature on the analysis of the effect of migration on the labor markets, is that most of the predictions, the results that have been found in the literature, they differ from the prediction of competitive models. In general, competitive models, they assume that firms are just like wage takers. So in the labor market, so whenever there is an increase in the labor supply or in the supply of migrants in economy, is going to reduce the marginal productivity of labor, pure like a pure competition effect. But this is going to be translated into wages, like negative effect on wages. But most of the estimates in the literature are around zero. And if anything, like the estimates are like very small, even like when they are negative. And this is like something that is puzzling in the literature. And what I'm going to try to convince you is that despite the fact that in many papers in the literature, many of the mechanisms that are in place to rationalize these puzzling results, they generally are around, okay, this is just like a short-term effect versus a long-run effect, or maybe there are like some complementarities between migrants and natives, which is like offsetting the potential negative effect on the productivity of labor. There are like capital adjustments, or even like migration is not only a supply shock, but also a demand shock. And this is going to compensate the negative effect on the marginal productivity of labor. Something that all these explanations have in common is that they are focused on the productivity of labor, or how migration affects productivity of labor, and trying to say, okay, migration is also increasing the productivity of labor, and this is the reason why we don't see like any effect on wages, because they are offsetting each other, the negative and the positive effects. But what I'm going to argue in this paper is that even when we find in the empirics like a positive effect of migration on productivity, this positive effect cannot be necessarily reflected, or it's possible that it's not going to be reflected in the wages, because there are other forces in the economy, in the labor market, and in the product market that are going to be part of the way in which firms are going to set wages that can offset these productivity effects. And particularly, what I'm going to try to convince you here is that when firms have both product and market power, the wages that firms are going to set are going to be basically equal to the productivity that of labor, the marginal productivity of labor, which is like the traditional channel analyzed in the perfect competition literature, minus the markup that firms are going to charge in the product market and the markdown that firms are going to charge in the labor market. And these two forces are going to enter into the wage equation. And if we have an increase in productivity, but maybe we have an increase in the markdown of the firms, meaning that the firms now are leveraging like more labor market power, these two effects can offset each other, and we are not going to see anything on wages. But there is like an actual increase in the productivity of workers that firms are like capturing or like benefiting from. Just to be on the same page in this throughout the whole presentation, when I say markup, I'm going to refer to the ratio between price and marginal cost. So how much more firms charge to consumers relative to their marginal cost. And when I say markdown, it's just like the ratio between the marginal productivity of labor and wages. So higher markdown is going to be higher labor market power for the firms. So with this in mind and taking this motivation, the research questions that I'm gonna try to answer in this paper are: first, what is the effect of migration on firms' labor productivity and wages when firms have market power, not only in the labor market, but also when they have market power in the product market, taking into account that migration is going to be not only a labor supply shock, but also a demand shock, and is going to affect both markets simultaneously. And secondly, what are the welfare implications of migration for natives under a non-competitive framework? Also, we can extend this to migrants, but the idea here is to understand, okay, if you have a migration shock, productivity might be going up, and this can affect the wages of the workers. But if market power is also changing, there is going to be like a differential effect in the way in which rents are being shared between workers and firms, and this is going to have like welfare implications in the economy. So in this paper, what I do in a nutshell, I study the effect of the Venezuelan exodus on Colombian firms within a non-competitive framework. This is going to be the setting I'm going to be analyzing. I'm going to argue that Venezuelan exodus brought new skills to the Colombian economy. Venezuelans are significantly skilled, or like more skilled compared to Colombian workers, which is something that is very particular of this migration episode. And I'm going to use the Colombian manufacturing survey from Colombia to study the effect on the manufacturing sector in Colombia. And what I'm going to show is that the migration shock increased the firm's employment on the one hand, which is kind of mechanical, like there are more migrants, firms start to hire more people. This also increased the output of the firms, which is like migrants are arriving, they are being hired, firms can produce more, but at the same time, migrants are consuming, so firms can produce more to satisfy like that, or to supply the goods for that demand. And the labor productivity of workers increased as a consequence of this migration shock. And here, like the channels and the mechanisms are like can be like multiple and can be like playing at the same time. But this increase in the marginal productivity of labor didn't translate to wages because first, firms increased their labor market power. Basically, what I'm going to argue is that firms, when they increase their market power in the labor market, they can capture these productivity gains without translating them into wages. And the channel that I'm going to posit in this paper that I'm going to argue is like at play is that workers in the manufacturing sector and workers who work for a firm, they have an outside option, and that outside option is self-employment, which is like a huge part of employment in developing countries. And when migration, like a migration shock happens in a country, particularly in a developing country, and migrants cannot formalize or they cannot enter into the formal market easily, this migration is going to reduce the value of self-employment, and therefore firms are going to have more bargaining power, and they are going to have more labor market power because now the outside option of workers is not that good. And this is going to increase the labor market power of firms. Yes.
Yes, Leonardo, I was wondering a little clarification with this. I was thinking like this self-employment like is very concentrated on the informal market, I guess, no?
Yes.
Like we don't consider like people doing little formal companies, no? It's more like people who do
This is people selling things on the street, people working like, and which in Colombia is about 50% of employment. So it's like,
I see.
this is not like, and here, like, I'm going to make a distinction. This is just like informal self-employment. This is not like entrepreneur. This is not like people like making or having like a firm or something like that, which is like a very small proportion of self-employment in developing countries. And also these are not like freelancers or people who work like in this modality, because this is basically like informal self-employees who are in a very like vulnerable condition.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and they are going to be like the outside option for many manufacturing workers in Colombia. Then migration is going to reduce the value of this outside option. It's going to increase the labor market power of firms. But at the same time, the other part of the market power is that firms are going to reduce their markups. And this is also going to enter into the wage equation. And this is basically because migration is going to shift the income composition towards the left. Like we're gonna have a lot of refugees, a lot of migrants, forced migrants who are like very poor. They have like a significant low income, and the literature has shown that people with a significantly like lower income, they are going to be more price sensitive. The elasticity of demand is going to be significantly higher. So firms are going to charge or are going to be able to charge a lower markup in the economy. Now I have a significant portion of my consumers who are more price sensitive. If I cannot price discriminate as a firm, I'm going to charge an average markup that is going to be lower compared to what it was before, because the average demand elasticity of the economy is higher compared to what it was before the migration shock. So just like as a summary of like what the effect looks like is that when I estimate the effect on the average wage paid by the firms in the manufacturing sector, I find that the effect is basically zero, like there is no effect. Here, this is the coefficient of my estimations and the standard errors. But I do find that there is an increase of 3.6% in the marginal productivity of labor, given a 1 percentage point increase in the share of migrants at the local labor market. But this increase, like if we don't consider any dimension of market power, this increase should have translated into an increase in the wages of workers because now the MPL is higher. But what we're gonna have is that the the labor market power increased by 6.1%. So if this increase in the labor market power is more than offsetting the positive effect on the productivity of labor, and markups are going down by 2.4%. And prices are basically not changing in general. So if we adapt all these effects, basically what we find is that this minus basically this zero effect on wages, in which we have like different components, and we can think about a lot of like dimension that we're missing if we don't consider the market power of firms. Like markups are playing in favor of wages because now markups are lower, which means that now wages, everything else equal, should have been higher. But down is also higher, which implies that firms now can capture more of the productivity of workers, leveraging their labor market power. So with this in mind, what I'm going to say is that once we have like these effects, and once we know that firms are having more productive workers, but they are capturing these rents or this productivity without translating them into wages, this is going to translate into an increase in firms' profits and entry. And I also have like some effects on this, although these are like second order effects in the presentation. So this is going to be the outline of the presentation. I'm going to talk about the contribution, then show you some data and descriptives, the empirical strategy, the results of my empirical analysis. Then, time permitting, I'm going to show you like a model that I'm working on, like a structural model to try to rationalize the results, but also to estimate like some counterfactuals and some welfare analysis, and then the final remarks. So the contributions of this paper are, the first one is like there are two new channels of the effect of migration on wages. The first one is that it affects firms' wage markdown. So the traditional markdown or labor market power effect of migration, which has been like proposed or analyzed recently by Amior and Stuller, but also by Alan Manning, is that migrants, they have a different labor supply elasticity than natives. And if firms cannot price wage discriminate between migrants and natives, they are going to place, or they are going to have an average markdown. And if they can, if they can like charge a higher markdown for migrants and a lower markdown for natives, and they cannot wage discriminate, the average markdown that firms are going to charge is going to be higher. Here, the main assumption is basically that there is no wage discrimination, so all the effect of the labor market power is pure a compositional effect of the labor force. But what I'm going to argue is that it doesn't matter if the composition of labor or workers at the firm level is changing, even in the assumption or in the scenario in which firms are not hiring a single migrant. If migrants go to a self-employment, say they don't work at all in the firm and they all go to self-employment, they are overrepresented in the self-employment sector and they reduce the value of self-employment, this is going to increase the market power of firms in the labor market because now the outside option for workers that work for a firms is significantly less attractive. So this is going to be like an important source of labor market power that is going to be at play, particularly in developing countries. The second channel is that migration is going to also something that is like kind of like natural, but it's usually like forgotten or ignored, is that migration also represents a product demand shock. And this product demand shock is going to imply two things. The first one is that it's going to imply more demand for products, and this can have an effect in the productivity of workers. Firms can scale up and they can increase the marginal productivity of labor under some conditions. But secondly, that this demand shock implies also a change in the income composition of the demand and therefore a change in the elasticity of the demand of the consumers, which is going to translate into a change in the markups that firms can charge in the local economy. And this is going to also affect wages directly when we assume that firms do not have market power that firms do have market powers in both markets. Then the second contribution is that migration is going to be a shifter of firms' double market power. There is an increase in literature right now, like trying to understand, like, okay, if we focus only on labor market power on the one hand or product market power on the other hand, but there are very few papers that analyze both market powers at the same time. And analyzing both market powers at the same time is important because they kind of offset or compensate each other if we analyze them in general equilibrium. And by migration affecting both market powers simultaneously, they are going to have like a different effect compared to what if we consider or get if we analyze them like separately. And finally, like the contribution of the literature to the like showing that migration is also a different determinant of market power in the economy in the world, but particularly in developing countries. So the data I'm going to be using in this paper, I'm going to use a comprehensive, unique, and confidential data set, basically the annual manufacturing survey from Colombia between 2012 2020. This is the census of manufacturing firms in the country. This is panel data, so I can follow firms over time. Like throughout all these years, I have data on wages, employment, capital, profits, materials, product prices, and so on, like a lot of information, traditional information from manufacturing service. But importantly, the confidential part is that I'm going to also have output and input data at the product level, 6 digits, which implies that I'm going to be able to calculate the quantities of the output that firms are producing. And this is going to allow me to implement some production function estimations to recover the markdown and the markups and the productivity of labor at the firm level over time. I'm going to use immigration data from the Colombian 2018 census and also information from the household survey in Colombia at the municipality level or local labor market level. I'm going to consider Venezuelan migrants as those individuals who were born in Venezuela and working age people between 15 and 64 years old. This is what the Venezuelan exodus looks like in Colombia. So this is here, I need to update this plot, but this is between 2013 and 2019. In 2020, basically the trend continued to go up. And basically what we have here is that after 2015, there is a significant inflow of migrants in the country. This was driven by push factors from the Venezuelan economy, basically the collapse of the Venezuelan economy in the last 15, 20 years, plus like all the turmoil and all the violence and the political repression in the country. And it started in 2015, basically because during that year, the borders between both countries were closed after a political crisis between both governments from Colombia and Venezuela, and then they reopened the borders, and this triggered a massive influx of Venezuelans in Colombia. And in the right picture, what we see is the share of Venezuelans in each department in Colombia, which are equivalent to states in the United States. And what we see is that basically the influx of migrants was concentrated like or was driven by the distance to the border. They are forced migrants, so they were able to be placed or like to go to those departments in which were closer basically to the border between the two countries. And this is going to be crucial for my variation in my empirical analysis. Um, we know that Venezuelans, they are significantly poorer than Colombian people. They receive a significantly lower average hourly wage compared to Colombians. And they were undocumented, but they didn't face any additional non-legal barrier to integration. Venezuelans and Colombia we are like very similar culturally in terms of language, in terms even of education, which implies that there are like many ways in which Venezuelans can integrate into the formal economy, into the labor market, formally similar to Colombian people. The only restriction that they have is that at the beginning, they didn't have the proper documentation to work in the country, which made them or forced them to go to the self-employment sector or to be hired informally. On the labor supply side, just to understand how I'm thinking the labor market in the economy, what we have is that in Colombia or in many developing countries, Colombia, Peru as well, for instance, we have like there are wage jobs or people who are working for a firm in a relationship with a firm, and these are about 48% of the people of the Colombian workers, and 52% of the Colombian workers are in self-employment who work like by their own and they are not part of a firm formally like they are not part they don't work for a firm. And within the wage job people or the people who work for a firm, for the case of Colombia, about 35% people uh, 35% of the workers in the wage jobs, they are informal, meaning that they work for a firm that is formally established but they work off the books, and 65% they are hired formally. So this is what the literature calls like the margin, like the intensive margin of informality. And for the case of Venezuelans, those who work for firms, 80% of them are informally hired and only 20% are formally hired. And this is going to be crucial because this intensive margin of informality is what is going to allow a lot of migrants to work for firms and therefore for firms to capture or to integrate or to take advantage of their productivity gains and their skills in order to increase the marginal productivity of labor at the firm level. Yes.
Sorry, may I ask, Leonardo, do you know if this share of Venezuelans work in firms and hold informal contracts, how it has evolved over time? Do you know if this has been going down after the regularizations or still like firms hire them informally?
I don't have the number now, but many of them, like they started to work formally after the regularization. Like in 2018, there was like a significant regularization of people, and then in 2021 was like the biggest regularization in which basically all migrants were regularized. That being said, in 2018, about, I don't remember now, but it's like about 300,000 people got regularized out of 1.8 million. So it's still like not like a huge
I see.
fraction of all the labor force. Then in 2021, the things changed because basically there was like a complete like opportunity to regularize migrants in Colombia. But
Okay,
yeah, like
I see.
many Venezuelans were able to start working formally throughout time because of these regularization programs.
Okay.
And then on the self-employment side, what we have is that Colombians, basically all the self-employees, or 84% of them are informal. So these are people who are selling things on the street, who sell like food or like some, like they do some activities informally on the street and they live on a daily basis. And only 16% are like entrepreneurs or business owners or something like that, which is not going to be like the main focus of this analysis, mainly because Venezuelans who work in the self-employment sector, none of them was an entrepreneur, or basically none of them was like, almost none of them was an entrepreneur. Most of them, 98% of them, were informally working in the self-employment sector out of the people who work in self-employment. We can see that for the case of like if we analyze the share of Venezuelans working in the informal wage job sector, it increased by 3 percentage points relative to a number of Colombians working informally in the wage job sector. But for the case of the self-employment sector, there was an increase of 8 percentage points in the number of people working in the informal self-employment relative to the Colombian self-employees before the beginning of the exodus. And the analysis here in the paper is that all these people, all these Venezuelans who entered in this self-employment, who affected this 50% of the local labor market, they are going to be affecting the outside option of the people who are in the wage jobs, in the red bars above. And this is like the channel through which migration is going to affect the labor market power of the firms. We know that in the manufacturing sector, this is the share of Venezuelans relative to the Colombian people before the exodus by skill level. And we know that it is there is like a significant supply of skills in this labor, in this manufacturing sector that I'm going to be analyzing. High skilled people, most of them, but also medium skill and low skilled people as well. But migrants are overrepresented in the manufacturing sector in terms of skills compared to Colombian people. So this was like a positive supply shock for the manufacturing sector in the country. And on the product demand side, what we know is that Venezuelans are significantly poorer than Colombia. This is the income distribution of Colombians and Venezuelans. And what we see is like the income distribution of Venezuelans is shifted to the left, meaning that they are poorer, and therefore, according to the literature, they are going to be more price sensitive. They are going to spend way more time like searching for cheaper goods and like trying to find the cheaper goods. And if firms try to charge a higher markup or a higher price, then they are going to react, changing a supplier or like buying from a different store or something like this, which is going to affect the way in which firms behave in the product market. So the empirical strategy in this paper, I'm going to estimate the production function of the firm. So I'm just going to have like the output in quantities of the firm. We have labor in headcount, we have capital, materials, which is going to be my proxy variable, energy, some TFP that is unobservable, and the output elasticities of the firms. I'm going to assume a second order translog production function that is going to vary at 2-digit industry. And this is going to give me just like time varying output elasticity. I try different robustness checks with different types of production functions. The results are like very similar. So just quickly, how do I recover markups? This is from the literature, and the basic like the summary of how to recover markups is just once I estimate the production function, I can recover the output elasticity of the inputs. And if I have, under some conditions, the markup is going to be the output elasticity of materials or the intermediate inputs relative to the share of materials in output. And this is going to give me like markups at the firm level for each period. And for the case of markdown, similarly, if we minimize like labor cost subject to some level of production at the optimal level of the other inputs that are not labor, the markdown is just going to be the output elasticity of labor, which is going to be recovered from the production function, divided by the share of labor in output, multiplied by the inverse of the markup. So I just estimate the production function, recover all the output elasticities, and then plug everything into these equations and recover the markups and the markdowns at the firm level. Then once I have those outcomes, I'm just going to run this regression, in which is a first difference like regression for each period T. So here we have the change in outcome of firm I in industry J, in municipality M in year T. Municipality here is going to be a local labor market, and relative to 2015, which is before the exodus. So I'm going to regress this difference on the inflow of migrants in each local labor market between 2015 and 2018 relative to the population in 2018 because of the census. And we're going to control for industry fixed effects and many characteristics at the municipality level. Our standard errors are going to be clustered at the municipality level. Here, the idea is that I'm going to be comparing those like changes in the outcome of firms for those municipalities within the same industry that were strongly affected by the migration shock at the local labor market relative to those that were not strongly affected. And what is expected is that before the 2015 shock, there is no effect, like beta is going to be basically around 0 because there shouldn't be like any difference in the outcome of the firms explained by this migration shock because there were no migrants before 2015. And afterwards, we're going to see the effects. Given that the migration shock can be endogenous, what I'm going to use is to instrument this with the inverse of the distance between municipality M and Venezuela's border crossing points between Colombia and Venezuela. This is a standard like distance instrument used in the literature. And it's going to have like a good first stage. And there are like other like assumptions and identification issues that I discuss as well in the paper. So just like to show the empirical results, first, we see that there is an increase in employment. Before the shock 2015, we see like there are parallel trends. There is no change in the outcome of firms in each year relative to 2015 explained by this migration shock. Afterwards, there is an increase of the employment in firms of about 5% in 2020. And this increase was also translated into an increase in production. And this increase in production was about 7%. So it's like there is an increase in the output of the firms, there is an increase in the employment of the firms, the output is increasing more than the employment of the firms, and this is translating into an increase in the marginal productivity of labor. This marginal productivity of labor is not plainly the ratio between output and labor, is the ratio, is the marginal productivity of labor that we recover from the production function of the firms. And I think I have 10 minutes left. That was 2 minutes ago. So I have 8 minutes left. And then we see no effect on the average wages of the firms. What this implies is that although we have a positive effect on the marginal productivity of labor, firms are not paying more on average to their workers. They are not paying less. And what I'm going to argue here is that this effect on wages is the same if we consider only like all workers, if we consider white collar workers, if we consider blue collar workers, or if we go into the household survey and try to study for the manufacturing, the people who are working in the manufacturing sector, okay, what happened to low skill, to high skill, to informal workers, to formal workers, and in general, we don't see like there is like any effect on the wages of of workers in the manufacturing sector. So it's not like a matter of composition itself. It's mainly like a thing that firms didn't translate these productivity gains into wages. And this is because there is an increase in the labor market of the firm, in the labor market power. There is an increase in the wage markdowns, and there is a reduction in the price markups of the firms, which is driven by this change in the income composition of the demand. So with this in mind, which are the mechanisms of this labor market power? I'm going to argue here that there are two channels, as I mentioned before. The composition channel, which is the difference in the reservation wages. We don't have information to see this directly because we cannot see at the firm level whether there are like the number of migrants and natives to calculate different effects on wages or like different markdowns. But I'm going to argue that the channel that is at play, the self-employment channel, that is increasing the labor market power of the firms. How? Because first, I show that if I estimate the effect on markdowns on average is the bar in the left. But then if I use the information from the household surveys and see in which industries and municipalities there were no Venezuelan migrants working in the manufacturing sector and re-estimate the effect on wage markdowns, we see that the effect, although is noisier, because there are less firms, my sample is smaller, but the effect is basically the same. So even for those firms that were not exposed to the hiring of Venezuelan migrants, there is an increase in the labor market power, which suggests that there is no change in the composition of the labor force for these firms, and therefore the effect is driven by an outside option of the workers in these firms. And also because if we estimate the average wage paid or received by workers in the informal self-employment sector, for natives, we see that there is a significant reduction after the Venezuelan exodus. So these two pieces, the fact that the outside option of workers is going down and the fact that there is no difference in the way in which firms are charging markdowns regardless of how exposed they were to the Venezuelan hirings, suggests that the channel is mainly the self-employment channel rather than the composition channel. So this is like the sum up of the effects that we find here, and it's like the markdown effect is more than offsetting the positive effect on productivity, but also the markup effect is playing a role and is making actually that all the labor market power effect is not translated negatively into an effect on wages. So I have, I believe, no, how
Yes,
much?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. So just in the last 5 minutes, I'm just gonna show the long run effects. We see like this increase in productivity, no change in wages, so labor costs for the firms didn't change, but they are more productive and they can produce more. They have a higher demand, so they are more profitable. And we see that if we calculate with the information in the manufacturing survey the profits of the firms, they have higher profits as a consequence of the migration shock. And this increased the entry of the firms, mainly at the end of my period of analysis, which is consistent that now the manufacturing sector is more profitable. And if there are no like, significant like entry barriers, firms are like some firms start to enter into the manufacturing sector. So just like briefly, like what I do for the model, just to rationalize my results in the last 4 minutes, is just a very like general equilibrium model in which we're going to have two sectors. We have the self-employment sector and formal firms. We're going to have local labor markets and a number of M firms in the local labor markets. And we're going to assume that natives are going to choose between self-employment and formal sector. They are going to say, okay, should I go to self-employment or should I go to the formal sector? And this is going to be based on some distribution of their abilities. And the distribution of their abilities is going to be given by an extreme value function with some parameters of dispersion. And they are going to basically maximize the return or what they get if they go to the formal sector and what they get if they go to the self-employment sector. And then there is going to be a product demand in which people are going to consume from different local labor markets in the economy. And within each local labor market, they are going to consume between formal sector and self-employment goods. And within the formal sector, they are going to consume different varieties of formal sectors. And this is going to give us like the way in which firms have like compete in the product market and the way in which they are going to charge their markups. And which we're going to assume that migrants, because they are lower income, they are going to be more price sensitive compared to natives. The goods in self-employment are just going to be produced simply by a linear function. So any change in the total supply is going to be translated into the price of the self-employment and therefore in the wages of self-employees. And there is a household budget. And then the firm's technology, they are going to have a composite of labor, which is going to be natives and migrants, and they are going to have intermediate outputs, inputs. And the cost function, which is a little bit more like convoluted, is just like they are going to pay the price of materials or intermediate inputs, which is going to be given. But for the case of labor, there is going to be a marginal and an intensive and extensive margin of informality, in which basically what we're going to have is that firms are going to pay like a cost to hire informal workers, and this cost is going to be significantly higher for natives. And they are going to hire some informal workers, bold L, and after that cutoff, they are going to hire workers formally, which is this expression here, and then they are going to have to pay a payroll tax. So firms are going to decide, okay, should I hire an informal worker or should I hire formal workers? Hiring a migrant informal is easier than hire a native informally. And this is going to explain the reason why migrants are more represented in the informal hiring compared to natives. And then what we're going to have is that the markdown that firms are going to charge is going to be the ratio between the share of employment of firms of each type of workers divided by the relative labor supply elasticity of workers between self-employment and formal sector and how attractive self-employment is. So basically, migration is going to reduce the attractiveness of self-employment, and this is going to increase the markdown that firms are going to charge. And in the product markup, the markup is just going to be the weighted average between this expression here, in which for the case of migrants, eta and rho are going to be higher, which implies that the elasticity of demand is going to be higher for migrants. And given that firms are going to charge a weighted average of the markups in the economy, the markups they are going to charge in the economy is going to be higher. So I'm just going to conclude. These are like the effects that I just mentioned right now. I am working in the estimation of the model right now, like to estimate like the main parameters and also to have like some counterfactuals and welfare analysis of this episode. But just like to, as final remarks, I studied the effect of migration under this non-competitive framework, and I showed that the Venezuelan exodus increased farm labor productivity, and the productivity gains didn't translate to wages because of the effect on firms' market power, and on the demand side, consumers were better off because product market distortions are now lower. And now working on this quantitative model and having like estimations of the welfare effects is like the next step to analyze this shock in the Colombian economy. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Leonardo. We are now going to have the discussion from Orlando, because usually another speaker of our seminar series would be taking care of this, but they couldn't make it today. So our very own Orlando is going to take care of this. Thanks, Orlando, for jumping in. And you're going to have 7 minutes for the discussion. And after us, we will have some time for further discussions if the crowd wants to comment on something.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dominic. Can you see my screen? Okay, great. Yes, and I can change, right? Yes, amazing. Okay, so thanks a lot, Leonardo, for a very interesting presentation of the very interesting paper. So it was very fun to read it. So here are some couple of comments I had on it. So before that, let me, even though you have presented it perfectly, let me do a little summary of the paper. So first, the research question of this paper is what is the effect of migration on the wages of natives in an environment where firms have market power in labor and product markets? And the how, on how does Leonardo tries to tackle this question, is basically, well, he presents a theoretical model to fix intuitions, right? Followed by an empirical strategy exploiting the arrival of Venezuelans to Colombia to test the predictions of the model. So correct me, Leonardo, if I'm wrong. So let me, so the paper has several contributions. Here I would like to highlight two. First, that the paper is very interesting in the sense that it sums up to this recent literature on the effect of migrants on natives' wages in non-competitive labor markets, right? And in particular, from this literature, like there has been some attention, as Leonardo said in the presentation, on the effect that migrants might have on the power of firms in the labor market through the change in the composition of workers and basically by changing the composition of reservation wages, right? And I think like here there is another argument at play, which is the one that he proposes, which is basically like it's not everything about it's not all about the reservation wage. Like even there could be a further effect by just changing what was the outside option for the workers, right? Like even if you keep the reservation wage constant, you will have another effect. Why? Because there is the outside option lose value, right? In this case, which I think is particularly interesting for developing countries, no? Like there is some papers on Peru as well on the importance of the self-employment, right? Also, the other contribution that I would like to highlight is that, yeah, like in this scenario, the migration effect on firms' ability to set price markups, which is something very novel, right? Like might compensate for this effect, no? Leaving native wages unchanged. So this provides another argument on why we observe these very small or even negligible effects on wages of natives that might be explained by the other part of the market, no? Which is a lot of times forgotten. So very nice in that sense. So things that I like from the paper. So I like the completeness of the results. So you have the effects, you have the mechanisms, you have the medium-term consequences. I think it's a overall complete picture of what is what the model is predicting. And in that sense, like it's very complete, the story. Also, I think you provide a very intuitive model that truly helps to fit intuition, not like in other cases where it's very complex. Like here, it's very clear what is the model speaking about, and also allow you to have some like good prior of what the effect is going to be before you see the actual tables and the results, right? Also, I like it a lot, the rigorousness in the estimation of the production functions, and then the concise and clear language. So overall, it was a very good reading. So I have a couple of comments, which I would like to highlight. The first is on the instrumental variable on the IB. Like when I was reading the data on the section on data, sorry, like you have this wonderful data, right, at firm level. You have variation on time, you have variation across regions. So I was thinking, like, why didn't you go to the classical shift share IV, which has been used in other setups? No? Like here, Libau uses for Colombia. I know like the IV itself, like the shift share, sorry, has a lot of caveheads. No? We have a very broad recent literature on the usage of shift share. Yes, but I think like this getting something like this would allow you to control for municipal, some geographical, more geographical fixed effects, no, at a smaller level, which are always a threat to identification. No? I think that also we could claim that distance to the border can correlate to other observables. It's true that you control for all of the things which I could have think of as a threat, right? Especially I would like to highlight controlling for the practices of firms in terms of exporting. No? We know that before the Venezuelan crisis, there was a massive crisis of demand also in Venezuela, which affected differentially firms, and we can claim that this might be explained by distance. No? Firms close to the border might be more affected than the ones further from there. Also, I was thinking maybe the latte interpretation for the instrument is a bit more cumbersome in the case of distance. No? In the shift share, we always have this enclave argument, no? Like migrants select to where people that they know live, right? But here, like, will be different, right? Like, we will say, like, two firms who are very similar in pre-crisis characteristics are going to be differentially affected by whether they are close or farther from the border, which makes sense in the story that Venezuelan migrants go by walk, no? But then also, like, makes you wonder, might this be hidden some differential treatment, right? Like, who are the Venezuelans who arrive that far, no? And do not stay as close to the border, no? So these were my comments on the side of the Ivy. Yes, so this is the first comment. Then I had another comment on firm heterogeneity. So I think like as I was saying, I think the data on the firms is wonderful, right? Like you have a lot of things on firms which are in most of setups unobserved. So I was thinking like I would have liked to see a bit more of like firm heterogeneity effects by different firm characteristics, no? I would like to begin with firm size. It's true that you speak a bit about firm size in the section where you speak about whether firms who have Venezuelans also saw the effect or not, right? But I think you abstract from that a bit, you pull a bit across different sizes when you take these cells, right? Like that have or do not have Venezuelans. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, I would like to see this especially because like there is this paper from Lucas Delgado Prieto, which also looks at Colombia, right? And he finds that small firms are the ones that where the workers saw bigger effects from the inflow, like young workers, unskilled workers. And we might think like, and we know that this might be because these firms are the ones that hire more informal labor, no? Which is speaking like to your findings, no? So it will be nice like to see how the things that you find, Leonardo, complement with the other things that have been seen in Colombia. And yes, and also I was thinking like I think in like the argument of the change in the composition of the demand because of the Venezuelans arriving and being consumers, right? Will be very nice to see how does this affect changes maybe in size if you check at some measure of exposure of firms, no? We could think that firms that produce goods which are cheap in price are going to be more exposed to changes in their demand compared to firms who produce like very, let's say, pricey items, which are far from the possibilities of Venezuelan immigrants, right? And it would be very nice to see. So I just had this couple of comments. So if you want, we can discuss them. And overall, as I said, like the paper was very nice. I like it to read a lot. Very labor, which is very nice. So that was it. Thanks for it. And these are in case you want the slides. Yes.
Okay. I don't know how many time.
Oh, we
Like,
can
you have
take
to-
5 more minutes, 3 to
Okay.
5 minutes, discuss a bit. Yes.
Or if there is like, should I answer or should I?
Yeah, if you want, you can comment on Orlando's comments, and then we also
Okay.
have maybe 2 minutes for opening the floor to the audience if they want to say something.
Yeah, just briefly, Yeah, I'm gonna check the firm size heterogeneity. In the new version of what I'm working right now is trying to see like different effects for the markups, particularly by firm characteristics. So I do have something on exporters and non-exporters to see if exporters they shouldn't be affected in terms of markups. And I do find that they are not affected because they are mostly like price takers from international markets. I do have a proxy of whether or not they supply their goods to very local markets. So there is a variable about like how much they spend on transportation of their goods. So I just proxy like those firms that spend little on transportation of their goods are more likely to supply goods to the very local demand. And I do find that all the effect on markups is concentrated there. And also I do something like with the type of goods, those goods that are like very homogeneous in the manufacturing sector and therefore are not that subject to market power because there is not like a lot of differentiation, so firms cannot charge like a lot of markups. And I do find like there is no effect on markups, but I'm working on that part of the results. I'm going to check the firm size heterogeneity and about the shift share. Yeah, like in general, like the reason I don't use it is because like in forced migration episode, like in shift share, the argument is like migrants go to places where other migrants are because of the networks, but it seems more like economic migrants who do that compared to forced migrants, like the Syrians in Turkey, for instance, like distance is like basically the reason why they located closer to the border or like closer compared to farther away. And the same in the case of Colombia. I think I haven't tried the shift share. I can do it to see what it goes, what it looks like. But in general, like my argument is like more about distance because of the forced migration episode. But yeah, I can try it and see how the results look like. Thank you, Orlando, for the comments and the comment. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Now we have 1 or 2 minutes maybe for a question from the audience, and if not, we will wrap it up. Let's see if somebody wants to comment on something, has a doubt. If not, let's wrap up here. Maybe Orlando, you can tell us how we proceed.
Yes. Yes, actually, I wanted to make a little question before we go to wrap up.
Yes.
Leonardo, no one wants us. What about capital, Leonardo? Like, have you, because I heard
Capital
like you were
doesn't
saying,
change.
okay, like there is no
Capital
effect.
doesn't change. Yeah, actually, I'm working on that because my argument now about the productivity, materials go up, energy go up, and I'm trying to show that the marginal productivity is going up because firms were underutilizing capacity. So they didn't have to hire more capital because they have underutilized capital. And by having more workers, more demand, they can, before their machines were working at 75%, now they can put them to work at 100%, which implies that they are going to work with more energy and more materials. But capital doesn't have to change necessarily if they want to supply like goods to the local labor market. I'm working on that, but capital doesn't change. What changes is materials, and that's why I'm including like intermediate inputs actually in the model as another input like in the production function.
Okay, I see. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the comments.
Yeah, no, also thank to Dominic because he helped me a lot to prepare the discussion. Yes. So let me wrap up. I'm gonna now share a little on my screen to discuss the rest of the seminar. So can you see my screen?
Lagging a
Yes.
bit. Yeah, now yes.
Yes.
Now, okay, so thanks a lot, Leonardo, for a wonderful presentation, for all the attendees to the seminar. So now, next week, so this semester, we are changing a bit the format. We're gonna have presentations each week, so we can end up early and everyone can go to summer without to going to connect back to Zoom. So next week, we're gonna have this paper by Thailand Alpkaya from Mannheim. It's called Legacy of Servitude, Long-Run Intergenerational Mobility in the US. You can sign up in the links that we're going to upload to the social media. Now, so now we will send all the questions that were sent to Leonardo. The video will be available in the following days in YouTube, and every feedback for the seminar is very well appreciated. So thanks everyone for attending today, and I will now stop recording.
Okay. Thank you very much for the organization of the seminar.
Thanks for
No,
your
thanks to you,
application.
Leonardo.
Enjoyed reading the paper.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Ciao.
Okay.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.